So Alexander, thank you for joining us today. We've definitely been looking forward to it.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Scotland is a very special place for me on the planet Earth. I lived there for 5 years. I graduated from a Scottish university, so it's a special pleasure for me to speak at the Scottish Astrological Association.
Wonderful. Well, we're very happy to have you. For those that don't know Alexander Kolesnikov, he's a teacher, author, and a software developer with a background in military aerospace engineering. He became interested in astrology in the 1980s while serving in the Army. He was so captivated, in fact, that in 1990 he left the Army to become a full-time student of astrology. Alexander has been teaching astrology since 1992 and is a published author of many books on astrology, his first being Teach Yourself Astrology, notably the first comprehensive how-to book on astrology in Russian. In 2006, Alexander graduated with a Master's of Science with distinction in Enterprise System Development from Glasgow Caledonian University, and since then has worked as a software developer for various British companies for 12 years. These were the years when he created his website, which many of us will be very familiar with, Lunarium, which, as we all know, was a very popular website and has been redeveloped again under lunarium.co, which I'll pop into the chat in just a moment. Alexander also created several apps for both iOS and Android, his most successful of them being iLuna. In 2018, Alexander moved to Bulgaria, where he focused on book writing and lecturing activities. And the original Teach Yourself Astrology book was republished, and after its success, the publisher has requested many more books. By now, 9 books were already published in Russia, one of them in 2 volumes, and more are being written. Alexander teaches online actively and conducting webinars and creating courses. He has 7 courses published with Udemy.com, the most successful of them being Astrological Forecasting for Everyone, and has over 4,000 students there and more enrolling every month. So we're really looking forward to your take on declination. And I know you can get the up-to-date declination positions on lunarium.co, I believe, which is handy for those that don't have it. I popped the website there, and I will put your stuff from Udemy there as well. But I'm gonna hand it over to you now, Alexander, and thanks again.
Thank you very much. So the topic of today's talk is Declination, the Forgotten Key to Astrology. And let me start from a few quotes. Zadkiel, a famous 19th century astrologer, wrote in his The Grammar of Astrology book, the zodiacal parallel is of more importance than any other aspect. The effect of this position is exactly the same as that of a close conjunction, but more powerful. So basically, Zadkiel says that parallel is more powerful than the most powerful of common aspects, conjunction. Another astrologer, also 19th century, Bishop Culpeper, wrote that the most powerful aspect of all is the parallel of declination. Then come the conjunction and opposition, almost equal to the parallel, but not quite. And Charles Jane, a famous astrologer of the 20th century, wrote in his book Parallels, Their Hidden Meaning, some charts cannot be interpreted in their main thrust if declination is omitted. And a contemporary astrologer, John Wilner, in his booklet, The Powerful Declinations, wrote, my experience has been that no horoscope is complete without declinations, and an astrologer would miss better than half of all aspects in natal and progress charts if they were not included. They provide an enormous amount of information. But unfortunately, in the contemporary astrology, few people are using parallels, and many experienced practicing astrologers aren't even aware of their existence. We can discuss the reasons why is that, but in this presentation, I want to try and give you a definition of what declination is and what parallels are, because parallels are the aspects of declination. At this point, the authors of articles and books about declination usually go into some complex diagrams, and people watching or reading just switch off and think, oh, bloody hell, it's too complex for me. I can't bear that. I probably can't use it. It's impossible. It's so technical. It's not for me. Let me try something different. I'm going to try and give you a very simple but sufficient for practical purposes explanation. Maybe not definition, but an explanation of what declination is. Because imagine you want to watch TV, and someone comes and starts explaining you the basics of electronics and how TV signal is transferred around the globe and how TV sets are made from what. And you would probably fall asleep instead of watching TV. Instead, you want to take a remote control and start pressing buttons and learn how to switch on, how to switch off, how to switch channels. That's it. Let's try to do something similar with declination. My idea is that to use declination, you don't need to be an astronomy graduate. In the same way, like to watch TV, you don't need to be an electronics graduate. So what declination is? Well, that's my explanation. Declination is the second dimension. It complements the zodiacal position, allowing to precisely define a planet's position in the sky. Well, that's still a bit technical. The second dimension. What's the first dimension then? Why do we need the second one? Well, let's recollect a little bit from geography. In geography, we use two dimensions, right? We use longitude and latitude, two dimensions. Because if we only used longitude, then we could think that Edinburgh in Scotland is located very close to Timbuktu in Mali, because they have the same longitude, about 3 degrees west. And that would be disappointing if you went to Edinburgh but found yourself in Timbuktu, wouldn't it? So we use the second dimension, latitude, which makes a lot of difference between the position of Edinburgh and Timbuktu. That's what we do in geography. Unfortunately, in astrology, we only use one dimension in common widespread astrology. This is just a chart, an astrological chart. And look, all the planets are somehow located in the zodiac. We have the sign of the zodiac, the minutes of the sign, but that's basically one dimension, that's longitude. That's longitude. And if we say, for example, that if we had this Jupiter in conjunction with a star, we would say, oh, it's a conjunction. But in reality, they could be as far from each other as Edinburgh and Timbuktu. An example why we might find the knowledge of this second dimension practical. You see two astrological charts. They're both for a new moon. How do you know? Because the sun is in a precise conjunction with the moon, right? In both charts. But one of them is a regular, ordinary new moon, and the other one is a solar eclipse. Why? What's the difference? Can you tell that this is an eclipse chart by just looking at it? Probably not. Not very easily. There are some tricks you can use, but it's just a conjunction of the sun and the moon. But in one case, the moon closes off the sun and we have an eclipse, but in the other case, it doesn't. So what's the difference? And the difference is in the second dimension. When there is an eclipse, there is no difference in the second dimension. The moon overlaps with the sun. And in the other case, when there is a difference, it doesn't. We have a regular new moon, not a sun eclipse of the sun, not a solar eclipse. But okay, so it's the second dimension, similar to latitude in geography, which can be useful and for many practical things. But how do I prove you that it's really important and useful in astrology, in practical astrology, in your astrological work? Charles Jane like to explain the importance or demonstrate the importance of declination using the chart of Walt Disney. This is his favorite example. And he used to say, look, Walt Disney has Neptune in the 10th house, and it's symbolically very appropriate for a person who was creating beautiful illusions and made a very successful career in that. Isn't it appropriate? It is. But the strange thing is that if you check the aspects, this Neptune isn't well connected to the rest of the natal chart of Walt Disney. It's just, non-aspected at all. Some minor aspects, some maybe one opposition with Chiron or something, but it doesn't have any integration into the chart. And the same can be said about the sun. It's not very well aspected, but the person is really a luminary. Why the sun isn't so well aspected? But if we look into the declination, into the second dimension, here is the aspect of complete. Now I'm basically showing where and how declination is showed in astrological software. So this is a chart of astrological aspects as it is shown by Astro Gold software for Mac. But SolarFire, a very popular astrological software for Windows, can show similar matrices of aspects. You see there are general or common aspects of longitude at the lower bottom, and there are aspects of declination at the top right. I haven't told you what are the aspects of declination yet, but let's just discover. And on the right-hand side, there is a listing showing first the common positions in zodiac, in longitude, the first dimension, and then the declination. Pretty much every software, astrological software, will show you declination in one or another way. You just need to find a listing, and you will see longitude and declination as well. This is again a screenshot from Astro Gold for Mac. And let's see those little symbols. They show aspects of declination, and you see the sun actually has 5 aspects in declination. It is very well aspected. And Neptune has also a bunch of aspects in declination. It has contraparallel with the sun, it's connected with Venus, it's connected with Jupiter. So we see how important they are and how they're well integrated into the chart, in the dimension of declination. But let's try to decipher what these symbols mean. For example, the sun has some aspect of declination with Jupiter. Let's look into this table. The declination of the sun. Let me tell you, the declination can be in the range of from 0 to 90 degrees, like latitude in geography. And it can be north or south. But normally, all the planets are within the 30 degree, from 0 to 30, not further than that. So let's look. The sun is 22 south and like 18 minutes. So the declination of the sun, 22:17 southern. And what else? Venus, perhaps, or Jupiter. Let's see Jupiter. And Jupiter is 22 degrees 47 to also south. So we can guess that planets make an aspect in declination when they have a similar or almost the same declination, like the Sun 22 and Jupiter 22 and Venus 22. This is why they're all connected. And Saturn 22. They're all in 22 degrees with something. So they're all connected. So this is another way to display declinations. It's a special standard chart from SolarFire. It shows a scale of declinations, again, from 0 to 30, south on the right, north on the left. It's a very convenient tool to see declinations in the chart. This is the first dimension, the regular astrological chart. This is the second dimension, the scale which shows where planets are in declination. And there is also a table showing declinations. So what did we see? First, I should probably mention an orb for the aspects of declination, how close they should be to be an aspect. 22 and 22 is good enough, but the popular orb is just 1 degree. There are some schools which say it should be 1 degree and 12 minutes. Charles Jane had an idea that the orb should depend on the declinations of planets, but that's too complex. We can just keep, for simplicity, 1 degree orb for the aspects of declination. And as I mentioned, declination can be from 0 to 90 as latitude in geography, but usually within 30, north or south. And parallel, there are 2 aspects of declination. One of them is parallel, and the planets have the same declination by value and by sign within the orb. So they're in parallel. 22 and 22 both south, let's say. This is a parallel. And the other aspect is contraparallel. It happens when the planets have the same declination by value, but the signs are different. Like 22 north, one planet, and the other planet 22 south. That's it. This is all you need to know about declination and the aspects of declination in order to use it productively in your astrological work. But demonstrating the importance of declination in natal charts like this is difficult because there are not so many outstanding people like Walt Disney. And in some occasions, you will find that in a natal chart, there are very few aspects of declination. And in another chart, there are many aspects of declination, but you don't really know if this person has developed already, or have developed already all those talents to demonstrate how they work. I think that the best way to demonstrate the power of the aspects of declination is using non-trivial relationships. By non-trivial, I understand when I mean when partners do something extraordinary to be together, like they sacrifice their career, or they neglect existing social norms, or go against the opinion of their family, or something else which is very unusual for the other people. They still do that and live happily ever after, as they say. Often in such cases, as I'm going to show you, the normal common synastry based on the aspects of longitude only is strangely mute. It doesn't give us a satisfactory explanation why this relationship is so extraordinary. And my favorite example is of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Look, he's a British prince. He could marry any girl and she would be happy probably, or many of them at least. But he chose a very unusual partner, a divorced American actress 3 years older than him and with a substantial previous history of relationships. And I guess royal family wasn't very happy about his choice. So he had to overcome quite a lot of, I don't know, resistance or opposition, but he still married her. And not only they keep their family, they have 2 kids already, and they've split effectively from the royal family. They decided to go their own way. So there's some strength in this relationship. Would we expect to see something extraordinary in their synastry? We probably would. Let's have a look. So this is a chart or table of the mutial aspects, vertically Meghan, horizontally Harry, created by Astro Gold software. I should admit that I keep very tight orbs, not more than 3, sometimes 4 degrees in longitude, and I don't use the angles of like ascendant or MC because I think they're not reliable without prior rectification, and I haven't done any rectification here, so I'm using only the planets and the tight 3-degree orb, but for all aspects, no matter what an aspect, and I use only classical aspect without semisextile trines, squares, and you see the aspects I'm using here. So let's have a look what we see here in this extraordinary relationship. The most surprising thing for me is, look, we don't have any aspects among luminaries and personal planets. I still remember that ancient dictum, as above, so below. And I believe that the things which are most important are often shown by the luminaries, and personal relationships should be shown by personal planets, Venus, Mars, and Mercury. And here we see nothing. Let's have a look at the other aspects, perhaps at the most precise ones. Look, the sun, Meghan's sun, is in square with Harry's Saturn. Not very inspiring, isn't it? Her Venus, okay, is sextile his Saturn. It's okay. His sun is square her Neptune. And that's it. And is this why they got married, after all? But okay, maybe Harry is just such an unlucky guy that he never met a girl with whom he would have a better synastry. Can that happen? I don't know. Maybe. Let's have a look at his synastry grid with Cressida Bonas. Cressida Bonas is an English actress and model. I think she's about 5 years younger than him, and they were in a relationship for a couple of years. Let's have a look at their mutual aspects and have a look at these aspects between the Venuses and Marses of these two young people. Quite impressive, isn't it? There is a lot of passion between them, and these are personal planets. And there are some other good aspects. Her Sun is trine his Pluto, his Jupiter is in conjunction. There is some excitement here, some mutual interest in Uranus, maybe not that much stability. But would you agree with me if I say that his synastry with Cressida Bonas is better, substantially better than with Meghan? So why did he marry Meghan then? The declination, the second dimension, gives us an answer. And here I'm showing you, it's a not very well designed table, but what happens in astrological software, you won't find any software which would show you in synastry both the aspects of longitude and declination. Someone told me at the conference, at the AA conference in October, that Solar Fire can do that if you tune it properly. But I didn't find a way to do that. And so I asked a Russian software developer. There is a new software coming from a Russian developer, Astroprocessor Zeus, to create such a table for me. And this is a table of mutual aspects between vertical is Prince Harry, horizontal is Meghan Markle, which shows not only the aspects of longitude, but also of declination. And look what we've got here. His Sun is in parallel with her moon, and her Sun is in parallel with his moon. And if you remember, some astrologers believe that parallel is more important and more powerful than a conjunction. And a conjunction of his Sun with her moon is a classical marriage aspect, isn't it? Coming from, I think, Ptolemy, one of those 2 or 3 signs of marriage, and it's mutual in their case, the sun and the moon of one person. So this is a rock solid. This is their lives coming together. You see, it's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary synastry, and we couldn't see in the aspects of longitude anything like this. There are some other interesting aspects, like the mutual aspect between Sun and Chiron, but it's not that important. This is the rock solid foundation. They were born to be together, basically. When you see this, imagine you saw a couple where his Sun is in conjunction with her moon, and her Sun is in conjunction with his moon. What would you say? Wouldn't that be amazing? Here we have this in declination, and some people think it's more important than a conjunction. So that's one example. And if we look at at a similar table with Cressida bonus. We don't have anything between the luminaries. Yes, there is a lot of passion, but nothing. These are like life paths coming together, you know, the luminaries. And Venus and Mars, yes, that's love, that's passion, but that's not as fundamental as the aspects between the luminaries. Another example, Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson, right? Wallis Simpson, yes. Again, he was a British king, and he, what's the word? He left his throne. I forgot the term for this.
Abdicated.
Abdicated. Thank you very much.
You're
and
welcome.
it's evening already. And he abdicated the throne to get an opportunity to marry her. And she was an American, I think, actress, also twice divorced, and a very unusual choice for a wife, for a king, for a British king. But he still went ahead and abdicated the throne and married her. Should there be some amazing synastry between them? How do you think? I think there should be something, but this is again the aspects of longitude, the synastric aspects of longitude. What can we see here? Well, pretty much nothing. Again, in this section, which shows the aspects between the luminaries and the personal planets. Well, there is a square between her Sun and his Mars. Okay, it's not the most inspiring of the aspects. There are some other aspects, but this square is empty. How can it be? How could a man sacrifice his? It's not just career; it's his life, right? Being a king is more than a career, and with this empty relationship sector, nothing between the luminaries, nothing between the personal planets. Strange, very strange. But again, you know what we're going to do. This is a table showing both aspects of declination and longitude. And look at their suns. I have another attempt to calculate. There is a 0 degree distance between. They're in absolutely precise parallel, their suns. Now here in this table, just 1 angular minutes difference. So their hearts are together. It's like one thing, right? A very precise parallel. And also her Venus is in parallel to this one sun for 2 people. And his Jupiter is in parallel to this. And her Venus and his Jupiter are in parallel. So these 4 aspects form an amazing, a very rare, and a very strong foundation for their relationships. And again, we only see them in declination. There is nothing in longitude. Another example, Prince Harry's father, Prince Charles, and his wife, Camilla Parker Bowles. Again, an extraordinary story, because Charles has pretty much abandoned his young, beautiful wife with 2 kids in order to be with his old friend, Camilla. Should there be something special between them? Let's have a look. Well, they do have some aspects, like his Sun is in trine with her Sun, which is good. His Sun is in trine with her Mercury. They could probably be good friends. What's amazing here, look at the Venuses. His Venus makes no aspects to her planets, and her Venus makes no aspects to his planets. And this is about love, isn't it? It's supposed to be about love. How can there be no aspects between their Venuses? And before showing you the grid of mutual aspects in declination, I want you to have a look at Camilla's natal chart. You can see that the Moon and Venus are in a precise applying conjunction here. And they're in 1 degree. The Moon is 10 degrees, 2 minutes of Cancer, and Venus is 10 degrees, 34 minutes of Cancer. That's a very precise conjunction in 1 degree in the sign where the Moon is very strong. And this is like a very strong focus of feminine energy. And we would imagine that in relationships, in Camilla's relationships, this focus of feminine energy should somehow take an important part, shouldn't it? And if we look back at this chart, her moon makes no aspects with Prince Charles's planets. Her Venus makes no aspects with Charles's planets. How can that be? Okay, let's go have a look at the table with declinations. This is Camilla's Venus, and look at these aspects. It actually makes with the planets of Charles, Prince Charles. Contraparallel with his Mars, parallel or contraparallel with his Jupiter, parallel with Uranus, parallel with Pluto. And they also have some interesting aspects with Mars, like how Mars is in trine with his Neptune, and his Mars is in parallel with your Uranus and contraparallel with his Pluto. By the way, there are two aspects, parallel and contraparallel. And some people think parallel is like a conjunction, contraparallel is like an opposition. But there is also a very substantial camp of prominent astrologers who believe that there is no difference, that parallel and contraparallel is pretty much the same aspect. So it's for you to figure out what you're going to think. In my opinion, there is some difference between them, but it's not as significant as between conjunction and opposition. So they're close to being the same aspect, whether parallel or contraparallel. So you can see again, only declination and the aspects of declination show us the nature and the importance and the strength of this relationship. And the last example I want to show you is Clooney, George Clooney and Amal Clooney. Clooney didn't abdicate any throne or sacrifice any career to marry Amal, but given the reputation of George Clooney as an eternal bachelor, and given his history of failed relationships, it's also a very interesting situation that he actually married Amal finally. And let's look at the mutual aspects. There are some aspects, there are quite a few of them, but mostly squares and oppositions. This is a promising aspect from her moon to his Venus, but we don't know whether it exists or not, because we don't know the time of birth for Amal. So I took just noon, 12 hours for her time of birth, and this trine might be not existing. We don't know where her moon is. So Mercury and Mars opposition, perhaps they're arguing, some squares. It's not explain. It does not explain to us again why they're together. And again, let's have a look. You know what we're going to do at the aspects of declination, and we can see here that their suns, they're in a square, but they're also in a very precise contraparallel. So this is a two-dimensional, so to say, connection, both in longitude and in declination. And it's very, very strong. It's not very easy because of the square, but still there is a lot of interest between them. But the most important, I believe, for a long-term relationship is that this parallel, precise parallel between their moons, it's the aspect between the moons is one of, I would say, classical also marriage aspects, because when people have their moons together, they feel very comfortable when they relax in their everyday life. That's more important than have a connection between the suns for just living together under one roof. You can remind me that we don't know the time of birth for Amal. So how can I say that the parallel between their moons exists? And the fact is that on the day when Amal was born, the movement of the moon in declination was very limited. So whether she was born in the very beginning of the day or in the very end, her moon was still in the orb of parallel to Charles's moon. So, and there are some other interesting aspects, but I think these are the most important ones. Again, the declination explains us the the truth of the relationship. I should say that it's not like this in every relationship. Sometimes you will see relationships that where the aspects of longitude tell the whole story. Sometimes the aspects of declination are important to understand what's going on, but it's different. In every case, it's different. But I would urge you to use declination in your astrological work, no matter what you do, whether it's natal work or synastry or forecasting or solar returns and everything. And you will see sometimes that the aspects of declination give you some amazing, very important information which opens your eyes on the case. Not every time, but on many occasions that would be so. And this is a link to the Astro Processor Zeus, the software I mentioned. It's currently in beta, so there is an English version for it, and this is a link to the English page, to the page where you can download the English version, and it's quite stable. I have it installed on my Mac, and it's becoming my main software. And it exists for both Windows and Mac. And at some point, for right now, it's free because it's a beta version. Try if it will work for you, then it will work for you. And it has an amazing amount of important features. If there will be some videos, there are already some videos, might be not that simple to just try, and you will see it does things. It does that scale of aspects. It does this grid of mutual aspects, which simply do not exist in other software packages. So that was about declination and the aspects of declination. Do we have any questions? Let me check.
One question that I think came forward was just about, if there's a sense of, and within parallels or contraparallels, when they are more exact, is there an intensification that is coming out of them?
Yeah, of course. The more exact they are, the more it's like a conjunction. If it's an absolutely precise conjunction, it's amazing. But also an important thing is when two planets are not only in conjunction, but also in parallel. That's like a conjunction squared, because it's very strong. It's called occultation in some schools of astrology, but in the other schools of astrology, it's called planetary eclipse. So it's the conjunction, and a parallel, it's very strong. Or sometimes you will see that planets are in a trine, let's say, but they also are in a parallel or contraparallel. That's also a two-level aspect, and it's very, very strong. But the more precise, the more strong, of course.
Okay, thank you. What I'll do is I'll pay attention. If there are any others that come up, I'll be sure to pose them as they do. Okay.
Okay, and I will try to make breaks like between topics and,
no worries.
Questions. So the next topic. So I hope I was able to like whet your interest to declination and aspects of declination, and they're not difficult to use. They actually, you just need to be able to find them in your astrological software and use.
Here's one question, Alexander. Sorry, I didn't see it before. Are you able to use declination with astrocartography or with thoughts around relocation astrology?
Not something I would. Yes, well, you can see if you're doing relocation, you can still see aspects of declination, how they show themselves in different places on the Earth. In astrocartography, I'm not sure whether I don't think you can use information about declination. In relocations, yes, you can.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Right. So the other interesting story about declination, or another interesting and important feature, is out-of-bounds planets. What is this about? This topic, as far as I know and as far as I'm aware of, was developed and introduced and popularized among astrologers by an American astrologer, K.T. Böhrer. I know that in the United States, her surname is pronounced as Bear, but I undertook a special international investigation to find out how to properly pronounce her surname. And I found out that it's a Dutch surname and that it should be pronounced Burger. If you are interested, I will tell you in the end after the talk what was my investigation, how it went. Quite interesting. So she introduced the idea of out-of-bounds planets, and she did a lot of research, and she wrote a book, Declination, the Other Dimension, one of a few books about, very few books available about declination. The other important and interesting sources of information about out-of-bound planets is an article by Steve Forrest, The Out of Bounds Moon, and it can be found online. You can see the link to it here. And there is also a book by Paul Newman, Declination in Astrology. What's the idea of out-of-bound planets? Well, the sun, in its movement around the sky through the year, can reach the maximum declination of about 23 degrees and 26 minutes. I'm saying about because this value changes slightly over the centuries. Like in the beginning of the 20th century, it was 23 degrees and 27 minutes. The good thing, you can always find this value in the ephemeris, in the printed ephemeris and in the online PDF ephemeris. It's called the obliquity of the ecliptic. It's often or almost often given in all the ephemeris. So it's about 23 degrees, 26 minutes. But the other planets can reach further than that. Their declination can be higher than this. The moon can go over 28 degrees in declination. Mercury can go to almost 26 degrees. Venus about 28. Mars sometimes close to 30. Jupiter, Uranus, they don't go far, just under 24. Pluto can go the furthest, sometimes even slightly beyond 30 degrees. And Saturn and Neptune never go beyond the maximum declination of the sun. They never go out of bounds. So when a planet goes beyond the maximum declination of the sun, it's considered to be out of bounds. What happens there? Why is this important? Well, we can say the sun symbolizes the central power, the government, the authorities, and an out-of-bounds planet like finds itself out of their reach, as if in a dark forest outside of the city. How does the planet feel itself out of bounds, out of the city, out of the light? It can be frightened, perhaps, like a person can be in a dark forest, vulnerable, lost, unsure where to go, what to do. But someone else can feel itself, his or herself free, allowed to do anything that was previously disallowed, anything it can imagine. And there is a vast array of possibilities here, from committing a crime to doing something extraordinary, something very good, but not matching the expectations of society. So the manifestations of out-of-bounds planets can be very strange or can be outstanding, but they're not just what you would normally expect from that planet. The sun also symbolizes the light of reason. And reason is usually a good thing. It plays a positive role, but it can also be limiting. It can tell us that something isn't possible, so you shouldn't even try it. And when the planet is out of bounds, it's not as much controlled by the reason. So it can make a person a genius, can help her or him to find an unusual solution for a problem that everyone thought was impossible to solve. But out of bounds of reason, it can also go crazy there in the darkness of the realm outside of reason. So again, the range of manifestations can be quite wide, but it's typical for a person born with one or more out-of-bound planets to stand alone outside the crowd, to be somehow special. And another typical manifestation is to reject things that most others would consider desirable or prestigious. And let's consider a few examples. Well, I believe that of the most interest when out of bounds are the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. The Sun never goes out of bounds. The Moon can go, and the personal planets, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Jupiter is also interesting, and it goes out of bounds very rarely. So it's informative and interesting when you find Jupiter out of bounds in a natal chart. But Uranus and Pluto go out of bounds for lengthy periods. I will show you later if you'll have time. So they're mostly like a generational thing. Like for 10 years, Pluto goes out of bounds for half a year, let's say. So half of those people born in those 10 years will have Pluto out of bounds. That's a generational thing. That's not personal, but I think it out of bounds Pluto and Uranus present a lot of interest in mundane research. And if I will have time, I will show you a little bit of that in the end. So out of bounds Moon, many astrologers believe that this is the most important out of bounds factor in the natal chart. It shows a person who is in one or another way unique, unlike everyone else, and has an unusual destiny. If there is another out of bounds planet in the natal chart plus to the Moon, it usually manifests itself more prominently when the natal Moon is OOB as well. And K.T. Böhrer is writing a lot about out of bounds Moon and many very interesting examples, and she did a lot of research. Excuse me. So she's writing that on many occasions, people with OOB Moon were deprived of motherly love in their childhoods on one or another reason. Later in their adult lives, they strive to compensate for this lack of love by achieving success, recognition, and wealth. And she even calls them the millionaires of the zodiac, people with out of bounds Moon, the millionaires of the zodiac. And the examples are Camilla Parker Bowles, Amelia Earhart, the famous pilot woman, the famous Albert Einstein, Sigmund Freud, Queen Victoria, Keanu Reeves, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Warren Buffett, Oprah Winfrey. All of them perhaps matching the millionaires of the zodiac label by K.T. Böhrer. OOB Mercury, how can it manifest itself? It's about thinking out of the box, and therefore a person with an out of bounds Mercury can find unusual solution for all sorts of problems, including those related to communication, transportation, commerce, and other areas of life associated with Mercury. And the most typical example is Elon Musk, of course, but there are other examples not that typical. Bob Dylan, Tom Hanks, Henri Matisse, Elvis Presley, Maximilien Robespierre, Donald Trump, and Marlene Dietrich. Some people, extraordinary examples. Louis Pasteur, for example, had 4 OOB planes: the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Uranus. Kirk Douglas, Mercury and the Moon out of bounds in a precise parallel with each other, as well as OOB Mars. Brad Pitt, another interesting examples, out of bounds Mercury and Mars in a precise parallel. Out of bounds Venus. Unlike everyone else in the realm of beauty, art, taste, attractiveness, love. And the interesting note is that those men who women find especially attractive often have an out of bounds Venus. Here is the list: David Beckham, Frank Sinatra, Clint Eastwood, Omar Sharif, Al Pacino, Charlie Chaplin, Rodolfo Valentino. They all have out of bound Venus. Interesting. And you will see that some women about whom you would think she probably has an out of bounds Venus, but they actually have an out of bounds Mars very often, on some reason. Also, you can find painters, sculptors, musicians, people who create beauty with out-of-bounds Venus. Auguste Rodin, Albrecht Dürer, Yehudi Menuhin, Johannes Brahms. An outstanding example, because I don't know to which group to add him. Winston Churchill had an out-of-bounds Venus. Cher, the goddess of pop, same history, same story. Interesting example, Brooke Shields, Venus and the Moon out of bounds, and she became a child model aged 10 years. And Catherine the Great, also Venus and the Moon out of bounds, and she was a patron of arts and famous for having many lovers. Out of bound Mars, an unusual approach or ability when it comes to spending energy, can make a person unusually brave or sexually gifted or having an undefeatable fighting spirit. In major astrology, there is such a school of astrology. They believe that out of bounds Mars is a super sports champion factor. So it makes the person a good sportsman or a sportswoman. And some other examples: Amal Clooney, Prince Charles, Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, Walt Disney, Julia Roberts, Greta Garbo, Lady Gaga, Martin Luther King, Pablo Picasso, Agatha Christie. Interesting example, outstanding example is Rupert Murdoch. He has an out-of-bounds Mars, and the moon is so far out of bounds as it can be, 28 degrees and 15 minutes south. And Larry King, also an interesting example, was born with out-of-bounds Moon, Venus, and Mars, 3 planets. Out-of-bounds Jupiter is very rare. I spent quite a bit of time trying to find examples, but I still found a few. Prince Harry, I think for out-of-bounds Jupiter, it is typical to have an unusual worldview or philosophy. And Prince Harry is a good example because he actually left his noble family, decided to separate from the royal family, and that's like an out-of-bounds Jupiter for me. Carl Pribram is a very interesting scientist, very innovative scientist who introduced the holonomic model of consciousness, who basically says that our consciousness is not in our brain, it's somewhere else. And there are some very interesting experiments showing that. So he is changing our worldview. And Enrico Fermi is the architect of the nuclear age, also a very outstanding thinker and person, perhaps philosopher as well. So those were some curious examples. I found that it's typical for Russian leaders to have an out-of-bounds planets. Mikhail Gorbachev has an out-of-bounds Mars. Boris Yeltsin had an out-of-bounds Moon. And Vladimir Putin has both the Moon and Mars out of bounds, but I have a doubt whether his official date of birth is correct. I believe he might be a couple of years older than what we know about him, but this is according to his official date of birth. Actually, if you check the world leaders, it is quite rare to see an out-of-bounds planet in the natal chart of a country leader of a high level or of a high-level political figure. So Russian leaders are different in this respect, out-of-bounds leaders. And the only exclusion is Donald Trump. He also has an out-of-bounds Mercury. I believe that out-of-bounds planets are very important to consider in synastry. Why? Because imagine two people are meeting each other, not in the city, not in the crowded like hall or something, or supermarket, but out of bounds, in the forest or in the field where there is nobody else, just them two. Will they notice each other? Perhaps yes, because they will also only see each other. And I believe that when people have an aspect between their out of bounds planets, that's a very, especially that if that's Venus and Mars, for example, personal planets, or the moon, that's a very, very strong aspect. And in that case, if there is an aspect between two out of bounds planets in synastry, we should increase the orb. And because that might be the strongest aspect in synastry. And an example is David Beckham. His Venus has a declination of 2516 north. And his wife, Victoria, has Mars in 2458. Can you tell me what's the difference between them in degrees and minutes? It's just 18 minutes, right? So that's well within the orb. So his Venus and her Mars are both out of bounds and in parallel, and that's a very, very strong synastric aspect between them. Out of bounds planets can also become, if someone was born without an out of bound planets, that planet, some planet can become out of bounds in secondary progression, day for a year. And vice versa, if someone was born with an out of bounds planet, it can become normal at some age due to secondary progression. And the calculation might be difficult, but I created a free available to everyone out of bounds planets calculator, and here's the link to it. So you just enter the date, the time of birth, and the location of birth, and press the button, and it calculates you and tells you whether you or some person for whom you do calculation have an out-of-bound planet or a few of them, and then shows a progression for 100 years, what happens then. And I find that years when personal planets become to cease to be out of bounds or become out of bounds in secondary progression are often important turning points in life. For example, when I was 43, my Mercury, I was born with normal Mercury. I was born with Mars out of bounds, but my Mercury was in bounds. And when I was 43, Mercury became out of bounds. And that was the time when I moved to Scotland and became a student of Glasgow Caledonian University. Age 43, quite unusual, but that change, that was a major and very important change in my life. I think that we can make a little break for questions now, because further we are going to...
Yeah, if people have any questions, just go ahead and pop them in the chat there. Yeah, I think there was some commentary around, sometimes seeing that there will be a connection both based on the zodiacal latitude, but then also through declination as well. And then other times it's, as you said, Mark mentioned, like it's completely missing unless you look at declination. So I think people are really interested in the point that you're raising right now about out-of-bound planets in progression. So yeah, I think you can carry on if you want to, and what I'll do is if anyone pops a question into the chat, I'll make sure to raise it.
Okay, good. And you will have these slides. Will they have the slides to download?
Yes, if you're happy to send them across,
yeah,
then what I do is I will send it to everyone that registered today.
Excellent. Now, out-of-bound planets can be out of bounds not only in the natal chart but also in transit, because sometimes, and you can actually see on the homepage of my website, when a planet is out of bounds, there will be letters OOB next to it. And I think that the periods of when Mercury, let's say, or Venus goes out of bounds are somewhat similar to the periods of retrograde motion. This is quite a new idea. I'm still thinking, experimenting with this, but wanted to share it with you in terms of their influence on daily life. Why? Because what the retrograde motion is about, this is the idea how I inherited it from my teacher of astrology. Periods of retrograde motion are the times when stereotypes associated with planets are being changed. Like Mercury retrograde is when the stereotype of Mercury is being changed, the way we think, the way we communicate, the way we process information. When a planet is moving backwards, the old stereotype has already expired and we are looking for a new one. As a result, decisions directed into the future aren't reliable at such times. They're not based on an established stereotype. They're like houses built on sand. We say retrograde Mercury, don't make agreements or don't sign papers, we say usually. So periods of retrograde motion open to us also the positive side of them. They open to us new opportunities. Having no limiting stereotypes, we are open to ideas that would seem crazy at other times. So that's the positive side of retrograde periods. But my point is that something similar happens when a planet is out of bounds. It is in an uncharted territory and so is able to perceive unusual images and ideas, those that wouldn't be accepted by the establishment. However, anything created there when the planet is out of bounds, like Mercury, for example, might be too strange or incomprehensible for other people to accept, or that might be a stroke of genius, you never know. So these periods when Mercury and Venus especially are out of bounds can be a bit unusual. And I would be cautious, like in planning something like a first meeting, romantic meeting with the person when Venus is out of bounds. Or maybe that can be good. So this is a very new topic. It's open for research. I haven't read anyone writing about it. So that's just something to think about. Very often, astrologers pay attention to Mars being out of bounds in transit. And such periods often coincide with uncontrolled outbursts of energy, both in nature and society. Like there can be abnormal destructive weather conditions or fires or heat, maybe natural disasters, incidents and violence in society. And such periods of out of bounds Mars in transit can happen every year, twice a year actually. So they're not rare. And for example, there was a period of out of bounds Mars from the middle of January perhaps to February, less than a month long. So they're not rare, but sometimes those out of bounds Mars transiting periods can be longer than 6 months, and those are rare. And when they happen, they're often associated with some disaster. For example, in 1986, there was an out-of-bounds Mars for 194 days, and that was a period of Chernobyl disaster. In 2001, there was an out-of-bounds Mars for 188 days, and it was 9/11 during that period. In 2007, 2008, there was such a period for 203 days, and there was a global financial crisis. And the other lengthy period of out-of-bounds Mars is coming 194 days long. It will begin on the 23rd of October this year and will continue until the 5th of May 2023. So we should be very cautious about this period. Actually, I was interested and I created a simple script, as I'm a programmer, and I created a script which calculated all the out-of-bounds periods of Mars for, I don't remember, the whole century, 150 years, and the output of that script. And also it paid attention to the time when the declination of Mars was 0. So it was passing through the celestial equator, which is also considered to be a somewhat dangerous time. So to see the result, the output of my calculation, there is at the bottom, you see there is a link again to my website, Extreme Mars, and you can just click and go and have a look at those out of bound or extreme Mars periods for 150 years or so. Next, out of bounds Pluto in transit. So Pluto doesn't go out of bounds very often. So these periods are rare. But when they continue for more than a decade. In the latest such period was in the 20th century. It started on the 17th of February 1938. and continued in and out until 1953, the end of May. It was, I will show you the more detailed information about this, because Pluto was out of bounds like for half a year, then for a little bit longer, and it was those periods were getting longer and longer. And the culmination was in 1944 and 45, when the cause of World War II was reversed, like the UK and the United States entered the war, and it all rolled back basically. Before that, the totalitarian regimes in many countries were developing and expanding, and after that they were collapsing basically. And also the other feature of that period is that was the time of major advancements in nuclear research and in creation of nuclear weapons. And the previous such period, the previous such period was in the 18th century, in the end of the 18th century, and that was the time of the American Revolutionary War and French Revolution. And the interesting thing, so quite destructive and dangerous periods as well. And the interesting thing is that in 1793-94, I found in Wikipedia, was so-called the Reign of Terror. It was a series of massacres and numerous public executions, quite a terrible time, similar to what was happening in the 20th century, right, during the out of bounds Pluto period. And again, some not very good news. We have an out of bounds Pluto period ahead of us. It's actually going to start in the end of August 2025, and it will continue in and out. I will again show you more detailed information until the 16th November 2035 for 10 years. So quite a dangerous time again might be ahead. So you see the out of bounds periods of, at least judging by the previous two periods, similar periods. And you can see that out of bounds periods of slower planets can be useful in research. Out of bounds periods of Mars are also quite interesting, and I think they might mark evolutionary changes in the development of humanity. For example, one such period in the 20th century was from 1903 to 1907. And the very middle of that period, 1905, was the year of the first Russian Revolution. And Einstein published his relativity theory in the same year, 1905. Also, that was the beginning of the pioneer era in aviation, which is, yes, also associated with Uranus. In 1947, 1955 was the second period of out of bounds Mars, Uranus in the 20th century, and it overlapped with out of bounds Pluto period. And I think, do you remember I mentioned that there was a lot of nuclear research and development of nuclear weapons. I think that out of bounds Uranus marked the technological part of that, and also the means of delivery, like bombers, airplanes, and missiles were created in that period of time. And the curious detail is that the two main materials from which nuclear bombs are made are uranium and plutonium, and you see Uranus and Pluto were out of bounds in the middle of the century when all that stuff was being created. The next out of bounds period of Uranus was in 1987 to 1999, and I believe this is strongly associated with the development and emergence of personal computers and the internet. So I would say out of bounds Uranus show us like the main stages, I would say, of technological development of humanity in the 20th century. And if that's correct, then perhaps the next period of out of bounds Uranus in 2031, 2035 will show us some, again, technological achievements, but again, it will be overlapping with out of bounds Pluto. So those may be again instruments of war or something like that. I don't know, or something what will be happening there. So not very optimistic forecast, I would say, but as astrologers, we have to know the truth, shouldn't we? And this is the result of my little work. What I did, I was reading about out of bounds planets, and I've read that the Uranus and Pluto, like something, they rarely become out of bounds, and that wasn't satisfactory for me. So I took the ephemeris and spent a few evenings just writing down the periods when they were out of bounds, and this is the result of my work. Just to go through them quickly, you will have the slides. You will see that Jupiter out of bounds for short periods of time, like for a couple of months, and here it was out of bounds in 1901, next time in 1907, not very often, and just for a couple of months. So Jupiter out of bounds is a rare factor. Here are the period of out of bounds periods of Uranus. They go, you can see them when they start, when they finish, and the maximum declination. And then Pluto starts in the year 1938, the development of fascism in many countries. And the war, and you see, first it starts in the middle of February and goes until the beginning of June. Next year it starts in the end of January already, so it becomes longer and until the end of June. Then in the middle of January and until the middle of July and so on, they're becoming longer and longer, and until in the year 1944, they become the longest from the middle of December to the middle of August, but then they become shorter and they overlap with Uranus and so on. And you can see all these periods coming, and there won't be them for a while, but now in 2025 we have out of bounds Pluto again. So these are, and before I switch to the questions, I will tell, because we have time, I will tell you the story how I found out how to pronounce the surname of Katie Böhrer. So I thought it's a French surname, so it shouldn't be pronounced as Bear. So I wanted to find out how to. And I live in a Bulgarian village, which is pretty much international here. So there are people of many nationalities living here. And I have a French neighbor, and I asked her, look, is this a French surname? And she told me, no, that's not French, that's probably Dutch. So I found a Russian family whose daughter is married to a Dutch man. And I asked them to send the surname to that Dutch man for him to record for me how to pronounce this name. And he recorded that and sent me an audio file saying Böhrer. And then I went to Wales, to that fantastic private library owned by Philip Graves. It's an amazing astrological library. I was doing research into declination, and I couldn't find a couple of sources, like in spring 1998, of the 1998, the NCGR journal was completely devoted to declination, but NCGR couldn't provide any copy of that journal for me, but I found it in Philip's library. So I went to Wales and visited his library for a couple of days, and he was kind enough to give me work there. But why I'm telling about him, because he's a knowledgeable person, he knows a few languages. And once I showed him the name of KT, he immediately told me it should be pronounced Böhrer, because of his knowledge of European languages. So that's what kind of international investigation I undertook, and how I know how to pronounce her name now properly, I believe. So this is it. This is everything I wanted to tell you. Now questions, please.
Yes, okay, so we've got a few. One around when we're looking at the secondary progress declination, what are people to look out for and what might that indicate for them?
Well, it depends. Actually, I tried to look this to realize how it works using biographies of celebrities, but it's not very informative because those brief biographies, which are normally available, are not very informative. I just noticed that when Bill Gates had his Mercury going out of bounds, I think he was for the first time mentioned as something like the most successful, the most influential businessman or something. I just suggest you do the calculation, and different people are writing to me saying, oh, there is something amazing that rarely happened in that age when my planet went out of bounds or returned from. Basically, when a progressed planet, especially a personal planet, goes out of bounds, that's when you go your own way, or you find something you are becoming less influenced by your environment, by other people, by the society. You have more like ability to go your own way, like I did when my Mercury went out of bounds. I just left all the previous life and moved to Scotland.
Right, and I think there might have been, is there anything about, just one thing I wanted to ask as well, was around, you know, with older texts where they are talking about something like celestial latitude and making that distinction between the south and the north. And, you know, that's always been an interesting topic to see how people reconcile that. But do you think that when a planet by declination were to cross the celestial latitude or celestial equator, that would also show something potentially over secondary progression?
Actually, if we're speaking about latitude, there is an interesting curiosity, because normally when astrologers are using, we are all using ecliptic longitude, right, as the first dimension. And it would be natural to use ecliptic latitude as the second dimension. But we don't do that. Those people who do use the second dimension, right? We prefer to use declination instead. One reason, yeah, of course, the planet crossing the celestial equator is important always, and that's like the planet influencing the whole world. And why do we do such a strange thing? We use one dimension from the ecliptical system of coordinates and the declination from the equatorial actual system of coordinates. There is a good reason behind it. The pragmatic reason is just because it works well. And in latitude, in celestial or ecliptic latitude, planets don't go that far from the ecliptic, so they're less informative, and the orbs should be kept very narrow. But in declination, there are additional benefits of using the declination, because we are measuring, technically, we are measuring the distance of the planet from the celestial equator there. And then it gets into that very ancient cycle of nature. Planets with declination, it becomes very similar to the symbol of Anticia, right? Because planets with similar declination, they're as if mirrored against the very important axis, 0 Cancer, 0 Capricorn, or 0 Aries, 0 Libra. Actually, Charles Jane believed that Anticia is one of the kinds of parallels of declination, and he distinguished 3 of them. That's one reason. So it gets into the cycle of solar movement around the year. So there is something important, seems to be something more important than that, those mirroring against the important axis. But also, I think it was Charles Jane who expressed this idea. When we're measuring the distance of the planet from the celestial equator, celestial equator is the projection of the equator of the Earth. And so anything that's measured against the or relative to the celestial equator is somehow very much connecting to things happening on the Earth. And it's surprising then, not surprising then, that declination and the aspects of declination are especially influential and important and always used in those branches of astrology that are dealing with the real life, with the worldly events, like astrometeorology. They use declination all the time, very important there, or financial astrology. They also, with you know, of a global influence, of a global interest. So that's why we have such a strange combination of ecliptical longitude as the first dimension and declination as the second dimension. That's practically meaningful.
Definitely. And one thing I would say is, you know, just out of curiosity from your take on it, you know, I think a lot of people have tried to talk about northern declination or celestial latitude and southern declination or celestial latitude as being quite distinct, you know, that one is, do you find that that is so predictable in your work that you've done that it's very obvious south or north?
No, I haven't found any obvious evidence. I know about this opinion that when there are a lot of planets in northern declination or latitude, they're like more influencing the external world or external life of the person, and when they're in the southern. Actually, there is an interesting question. I don't know if it's a sideways question, but still about the north and south lunar nodes, you know, because
Yes.
I wrote a book about the lunar nodes. And I asked the question myself, the north node is the north and ascending, and it has, well, certain symbolism. But is this symbolism correct only for the people who were born in the northern hemisphere? How about the people born in the southern hemisphere? And I did a little bit of research trying to, you know, to see the position of the lunar nodes and the charts and events in life and so on. And I came to a conclusion that maybe, just as a hypothesis, for those born and living in the in the southern hemisphere, they used to take, they should take the symbolism of the lunar nodes, the opposite of what it's taken in the northern hemisphere. So maybe it's the same with declinations as well. For people born and living in the southern hemisphere, the declinations in the southern hemisphere can be more like real life and external life, and those in the opposite hemisphere like more internal something. But I haven't noticed such a, I think that this is such a subtle distinction.
Yeah.
I've read people writing about them, but haven't noticed myself.
Yes, no, I think you either seem to get people in the camp of they are very distinct, or there's like not very a clear distinction between them. So thank you for that. The other one was, I think that just apologies to make this happen at the very end, but just one last time for those that were, I think a few people were still slightly confused around parallel and contraparallels, that those aspects are not based on the celestial longitudes. They're not based on zodiacal placement, you know, that it's based on, as you could say, it's based on a different figuring of its relationship to the Earth.
It's perpendicular, and that's the reason why you don't see the aspects of declination in an ordinary natal chart, because in the natal chart, it's like we only see one dimension, and you can say that declination is perpendicular to the surface of the chart, or to the plane of the chart. It's like you can think that planet can move above the chart or below the chart. That's where declination is. So we need some additional tools like that scale I showed you, showing where planets are in declination. And Solar Fire does a brilliant work for that with that scale. I find it very, very useful, and I'm convinced that Russian software developer to create a similar scale in his software as well.
Awesome. Well, I think you've given people, for people that weren't already interested in it, I think that they've given a lot of people that are newly interested in this topic a chance to go out and explore it a little bit. I think the only last question that I had seen was around a comment with out of bounds moon, that is the thing, is that once you tell people go look at your out of bounds planets, a lot of people will be like, oh, I have out of bounds moon. And a lot of people will say immediately that, well, lots of people have an out of bounds moon. But what are your thoughts on this?
I think, well, there are periods when the moon never goes out of bounds for years. I don't have the chart. It depends on the movement of the lunar nodes. There are periods of many years when the moon never goes out of bounds. And there are then periods when every month the moon goes out of bounds. So it depends which year the person was born, actually. It's not everyone having, even if you calculate using that online calculator, you often will see that some people have the moon going in bounds, out of bounds all the time, and other people will never have it. So it depends when you were born. And I believe, just from the memory, that the most frequently met out of bounds planet is actually Mars. But yeah, not the moon, as far as I remember.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of our time. I really appreciate it, Alexander. And what I'll do is I'll just stop the recording there for anyone that watches after. But thank you so much. And I'm here to give you, on behalf of everyone, a real round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you.